When we think about Spanish fluency, we often think of arguably the very hard part of Spanish fluency, which is speaking the language. Is there anything more to fluency than speaking the language? Yes, and that is listening. Conversation is really what we're after here. We want to have dialogue with others. In order to do so, you must both speak and you must listen to the person you're speaking to and respond. Thinking of it as a two-way street, I can tell you that the easier half of that street is, of course, listening. And when we think about getting started on the path to fluency, I cannot think of a better way to tune in your ears and really get used to this concept of listening to the language than a good podcast. In today's video, we're going to talk all about the world of Spanish language podcasts. My name is Scott Bryan, and when I got started on the path, I spent the time to find a good podcast, and I listened to that over and over and over again. And today, even today, a couple years into this, I still go back and listen. It's really cool. It's interesting. And so I want to share with you in today's video some real tangible, practical tips for how to find the right podcast, how to use it in your daily activities and get the most out of it. And in addition to all of that, I'm going to share with you one of my favorite podcasts in doing that. So, les explicaré por qué funcionan, cómo usarlos y a compartir uno de los ejemplos míos favoritos. So let's get started right now. So let me begin by putting this in context of where this fits within what I call the 4 pillars to gaining fluency. First of which is learning the language. Second pillar is translation practice. Third is conversation practice. And fourth is conversation with others. Again, because it's listening we're talking about in this case, listening and speaking, it absolutely plays into where we're headed, which is conversation with others. You think about the other pillars, conversation practice, translation practice, it's really over here in learning the language. We're preparing for pillar number 2, if you will, by doing this. So it's, again, an early stage activity. You have to have some knowledge of the language to be able to hear and understand Spanish, of course, but it's a progression there. So it's really, I would position it as your path to leave pillar 1 and enter pillar 2, if you will. So super important. And again, when I think about finding the right podcast to listen to, I love the idea of an educational podcast, one that's focused on teaching you the language. Because regardless of whether or not and where you are in the process of learning the language, it will help. You can find one at the right level. Some are a little more beginner-centric and others are more advanced. But you're hearing someone speak the language, right, about a topic of interest. And that kind of encapsulates everything. So it's going to be, by definition, useful. You'll learn something about the language. But most importantly, and the real value of the podcast, I will tell you over and over again, is you're hearing someone speak the language. That is so important. And it's in context, a native speaker speaking to you. So that is really why I love the podcast. And of course, I have a methodology for gaining fluency that's shared with you in this library of videos that I've created. But what I love about podcasts is they fit so well with my thinking on how best to gain fluency in a very practical, meaningful, and expedited manner. In other words, podcasts are, by definition, because they're on your phone, practical. It fits into your day. You listen to it whenever and wherever you want, 24/7. You click a button and you can listen to it on your way to work, on your way home, running errands, walking the dogs, whatever it is. It's there and available. It's contextual. Right? Another big thing for me is that if we're learning about speaking and conversation, it's important to hear not just the words and the vocabulary, but have them put in context in the form of a full spoken sentence. So you start to hear and start to train your brain on how people are speaking. And then the last thing I would say, if you find the right podcast, it also hones in on another important element of my methodology, which is personalize. It's personalization. In other words, it's at your level on things of interest to you. You get to choose which podcast you subscribe to and start listening to on a daily basis. And if you do the right one, you'll find one at your level on something of interest that hopefully is enjoyable. I can tell you, when I was listening to podcasts on a daily basis, I loved it because I not only got all of the practical, simple, contextual stuff, but it was fun. I'd always learn something new. And again, the educational podcast kind of, for me, really hit home and is front and center to like the right kind of podcast that hits all that criteria. ¿Y cuál era mi favorita? What was my favorite podcast? I used to listen to something called Españolistas. And it was a husband and wife team. Woman is Andrea. She's from Colombia. Great accent. Of all the countries you can learn Spanish from, I have found that I think Colombia ranks way up there in terms of easiest to understand, spoken, and perhaps its truest form. No big, strong accents to overcome. It's pretty straightforward. And she was teamed up. Her partner, her husband now, is a guy named Nate, who's from my native state of Texas. It's kind of funny. We have similar backgrounds, I guess, although he's gone down a very different path in life, right? He's devoted himself to this thing. But it was interesting. The whole premise of this podcast was this woman teaching her husband Spanish. And he was a gringo, hardcore Texas gringo, bad accent. And to this day, I gotta say, Nate, you've made massive progress over the years. I think your accent could still be a little bit better. That said, it was fun, and it still remains to be. Look, they've been doing this now for, 5-10 years maybe. It's been a while. But when they started, this guy could not speak Spanish. And so she would give him exercises and pause in the lessons, ask him a question. He would think. You could always pause your own phone and think, okay, what would I say the answer to that question is? And then she would say the answer and she would explain it. And I just checked all the boxes. And it was funny. They obviously have a really good, fun relationship. She's laughing at him. He's laughing at her. He has a good sense of humor. For me, it worked. I guarantee you there's a lot of other great podcasts out there that I'm not aware of that you can find that they're going to fit for you. I can tell you that Españolistas hoy en día is muy avanzado. They're getting into really deep stuff, as they should. The thing that always struck me about this podcast was, okay, it was cool at the beginning because he really couldn't speak Spanish. Well, guess what? The guy, he's now, I think they have a child. They live in Colombia. He's surrounded, he's completely immersed in it. Of course he speaks Spanish completely fluently. And I was always wondering how this thing's going to end, right? Because he's no longer the student he was purported to be from the beginning. As it makes sense. It was fun to watch their progress. Again, everything I described previously, this one for me checked the boxes. And on top of that, I can lastly share with you the fact that every single podcast, they have this little canned introduction. And just hearing that canned introduction, ask him to leave reviews and all this stuff, you start to learn. They say the same thing every single time. You learn those phrases. You learn how they say them. And because they're the same people, you start to learn their expressions and how they communicate. And there's just so much there. And again, it starts here. It's learning the language, but it's helping you progress towards that next step, which I think is starting to translate sentences and go down that path. But super, super helpful. I really enjoyed this. Y en resumen, look, podcasts aren't going to make you fluent, but they absolutely are the perfect prerequisite, the starting point to gaining fluency. You're hearing a native speaker over and over again, and that frequency every single day, hearing the same thing over and over again. super, super important, that the daily habit. And there's no easier way to start a daily habit than that little thing that's on your phone. You click a button and you listen to it for 10 minutes or 15 minutes and you laugh. It's just importantísimo y valdrá la pena para todos los que está en ese camino y toman todo eso en serio. Super important. It's so worthwhile for anybody that's on the path and takes this thing seriously. So look, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. That's super important for me, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.